Yeah, I think so. Let's just restart from chapter 20. Okay, the resurrection. We're gonna restart. We read about half of this chapter, but it's a beautiful chapter, it really is. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. That was John, of course, John. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Peter and the other disciple, John, started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped in and looked in, but saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then, they still had not understood the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the grave. Then they went home. Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, Mary Magdalene. And as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they've taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you've taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. She turned to him and cried out, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. "Do not cling to me," Jesus said, "for I haven't yet ascended to the Father. But go, find my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, "I've seen the Lord." Then she gave them his message. Now, I want to go over just a few theories that were going around among the Romans back then, and some people who don't believe in Jesus. They made their own excuses. There's three main theories that they had. They were all false, of course. First of all, the first theory was the fraud theory. Basically, that someone stole the body, right? Someone stole the body. Now, I have a lot of evidence against each one of these three theories, in case somebody believes them. It's not true, and I have a lot of evidence against it. So again, the first theory was that's called the fraud theory, that somebody actually stole the body in the middle of the night. Now, the evidence against that statement. Remember, Roman guards were posted, so no one could steal it. Disciples didn't believe Jesus was going to rise. If Jesus' enemies had taken it, they would have produced the body to show he didn't rise. Disciples would not have died for a fraud. The second theory is called the swoon theory. Swoon. The description is that Jesus did not really die, he passed out, which is ridiculous. But the evidence against it is that Jesus' wounds, hands and feet pierced with nails, side pierced with a sword, were so bad he couldn't have gotten up and walked away. Soldiers did not break his legs because he was already deleted. After hanging on the cross, he wouldn't have had enough strength to roll away a rock that weighed 2 tons and fight the guards to escape. Then there's a third theory, the ghost theory. Disciples only thought they saw Jesus alive. They thought that basically they believe he was a ghost, right? Some people believe that he was a ghost. Not so. The evidence is the disciples did not expect to see Jesus alive at all. Jesus had a real body after the resurrection. He even ate and he drank. So those are a couple of things that I want to mention before we go any further. Now, there's a couple more things that I wanted to bring up to your attention. Now, There's such things as prophecies fulfilled in Jesus's uh, deletion. There's um there's been a lot of books, of course. I have a few of them myself, but there's a lot of books that show you the messianic prophecies that were written in the Old Testament, right? Let me bring up my little different Bible that I use here. This is the NIRV Bible. It's also easy to understand, but it's easier for me to just flip through the different parts here and show you what I'm going to show you. First of all, let's go to Isaiah. Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. Here we go. Let me see. We're going to go to Isaiah 50 and 53. Okay. To begin with, let's go to Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6. Now, this right here is how, well, let me read it to you, and you guys can decipher what it says. The reason I pulled this Bible out, the NIRV, because it's actually easier to read than even the NLT. So it's going to be very easy to understand. But so here we go. I'm going to read to you from Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6. Now this is written several hundreds of years before Christ was even here. About maybe 700 years before Christ, 600 to 700 years, okay? This was written. And it's almost like somebody was seeing him right there, what's going on. Look at this. I let my enemies beat me on my bare back. I let them pull the hair out of my beard. I didn't turn my face away when they made fun of me and spit on me. And again, this right here was written hundreds of years before the crucifixion. So it's a beautiful statement of a messianic prophecy, a prophecy about the Messiah hundreds of years before it happened. But we're going to get even deeper than that. Look at 53. I would suggest anybody, whoever wants to, if Isaiah may be a very daunting book, very, confusing to some people, right? But I really have to encourage you guys to at least read chapter 53. Chapter 53, and again, was written hundreds of years before Christ, right? But this is like if somebody was right there standing in front of him. And a lot of it, you'll see, this is amazing. 53. Who has believed what we have been saying? Who has seen the Lord's saving power? His servant grew up like a tender young plant. Talking about Jesus Christ, God's servant. I'll even say Jesus Christ grew up like a tender young plant. He grew like a root coming out of a dry ground. He didn't have any beauty or majesty that made us notice him. Like Jesus wasn't something that Jesus did not have anything in his appearance that made him stand out. Like he didn't have a big nose or extremely handsome or extremely tall or extremely short or fat or no. It's just a standard Hebrew man, right? In fact, from the child of Turin, he was basically about 5'10", 5'11", tall, right? And obviously he had a beard. He had his hair up down to his shoulder. But remember, the beard a lot of it was pulled out as well. So this describes the appearance of our Lord. He didn't have any beauty or majesty that made us notice him. There wasn't anything special about the way he looked that drew us to him. People looked down on him. They didn't accept him. He knew all about pain and suffering. He was like someone people turned their faces away from. We looked down on him. We didn't have any respect for him. He suffered the things we should have suffered. He took on himself the pain that should have been ours. But we thought God was punishing him. We thought God was wounding him and making him suffer. But the servant was pierced. Remember on the side? Was pierced because we had sinned. He was crushed because we had done what was evil. He was punished to make us whole again. His wounds have healed us. All of us are like sheep. We have wandered away from God. All of us have turned to our own way, and the Lord has placed on his servant the sins of all of us. He was treated badly and made to suffer, but he didn't open his mouth. He was led away like a lamb to be destroyed. Sheep are silent while their wool is being cut off. In the same way, he didn't open his mouth. He was arrested and sentenced to the grave. Then he was taken away. He was cut off from this life. He was punished for the sins of my people, who among those were living at that time tried to stop what was happening. He was given a grave with those who were evil. Remember the two thieves on the cross? But his body was buried in the tomb of a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea. He was destroyed even though he hadn't harmed anyone, and he had never lied to anyone. The Lord says, it was my plan to crush him and cause him to suffer. I made his life an offering to pay for sin. But he will see all his children after him. In fact, he will continue to live. My plan will be brought about through him. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life, and he will be satisfied. My godly servant will make many people godly because of what he will accomplish. He will be punished for their sins, so I will give him a place of honor among those who are great. He will be rewarded just like others who win the battle. That's because he was willing to give his life as a sacrifice. He was counted among those who had committed crimes. He took the sins of many people on himself, and he gave his life for those who had done what is wrong. How's that? It's almost like reading the newspaper before it actually even happened, hundreds of years before it even happened. Now, funny thing, and I've always wondered this, but I've already studied this, and they refuse to even acknowledge it. Can you imagine a Jewish person right now in Israel that doesn't believe, even right now, doesn't believe in Jesus Christ, and yet they study the Old Testament like it was the law of God? Many of those Jewish people will read Isaiah, but they'll mysteriously skip over this chapter. They just don't understand it because they don't believe that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. But it's funny how in the Jewish people's own book describes the Messiah, what he suffered on the cross, and yet they still don't believe. Just wanted to share that with you. So that was Isaiah chapter 53. Then we go to Psalm 16. Well, there's a couple of Psalms, actually, to be honest. I can't really go through all of them. There's about half a dozen, but I'm going to go through some of the popular ones because I've even mentioned a few of these when we study Psalms before. Okay, first of all, we're going to go to Psalm 22. We covered this a couple of weeks ago, really. Now, let me see. Yeah, it's actually a lot of this, to be honest. Most of this, Psalm 22, now this is written by David, okay? David, of course. And obviously, it was written, oh man, about 800 years, 900 years, almost 1,000 years before Christ was even here. Several hundreds of years before Christ was here. The reason nobody knows for sure, because they don't really know when David wrote it, but he definitely quoted exactly the words of Jesus Christ that he said on the cross. We'll read all of Psalm 22. My God, this is what the Lord actually said on the cross. But again, hundreds of years before. My God, why have you deserted me? Why do you seem so far away when I need you to save me? Why do you seem so far away that you cannot hear my groans? My God, I cry out in the daytime, but you don't answer. I cry out at night, but you do not let me sleep. But you rule from your throne as the Holy One. You are God, Israel praises. Now, so far we have this quote in verse 1, right? But it's going to get a little more interesting. Let me make sure you guys can see this. Hopefully you guys can. Let me enlarge the screen. Hopefully I remember to. Okay. So we're going to skip over to verse 6. Okay, again, imagine the Lord saying these things. Everyone treats me like a worm and not a man. They hate me and look down on me. All those who see me laugh at me. They shout at me and make fun of me. They shake their heads at me. They say, he trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord help him. If the Lord is pleased with him, let him save him. But you brought me out of my mother's body. You made me trust in you, even when I was at my mother's breast. From the time I was born, you took good care of me. Ever since I came out of my mother's body, you have been my God. Do not be far away from me. Trouble is near, and there is no one to help me. Now, there's more. There's more. Let's continue. Remember, here you got to take this in context. Who wrote this? David did. David was going through some heavy stuff, as we already know. When we study Psalms, I go through a little description of what David was going through when he wrote these Psalms, right? So basically, it's David crying out for help, right? David is crying out for help. It's David's words. But what I'm trying to tell you is that in David's Psalm, David's words, you have words from the Lord that are mysteriously put in there, like what we just saw. He's God, Jesus' first words, my God, why have you forsaken me or deserted me? That's a direct quote from Jesus. Everyone treats me like a worm. They hate me and look down on me. All those who see me laugh at me. They shout at me and make fun of me. And then remember the people were quoting, he trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord help him. If the Lord is pleased with him, let him save him. That's direct from the New Testament. We go even further. Okay. I feel as if my bones are not connected. We're continuing from verse 14 of Psalm 22. My strength is like water that is poured out on the ground. I feel as if my bones are not connected. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted away inside me. My mouth is dried up like a piece of broken pottery. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You bring me down to the edge of the grave. A group of sinful people has closed in on me. They're all around me like a pack of dogs. They have pierced my hands and my feet. There we go. Here's more. Everyone can see all my bones right through my skin. Remember the times they beat him in the back with a whip? People stare at me. They laugh when I suffer. They divided up my clothes among them. They cast lots for what I am wearing. Interesting, huh? Interesting. So, and of course, there is also 31, the victory cry. The victory cry on the cross. And they will tell people who have not yet been born, the Lord has done what is right. Okay, now let's continue with 69. Psalm 69. Okay, Psalm 69, verse 19. You know how they make fun of me. They dishonor me and put me to shame. You know all about my enemies. They put me to shame. That's another example of a messianic prophecy of the Lord. Now, let me see here. This is gonna be interesting to you guys. Remember the wine with vinegar that they try to feed the Lord? 21. They put bitter spices in my food. Here we go. They gave me vinegar when I was thirsty. Imagine you passing away from thirst, right, on a cross, crucified, and you want some water or something, and they give you vinegar instead. Just imagine that for a second. Now, let's go to Exodus. Let's go even farther, more than 1,000 years back before Jesus. Let's see, we're going to go to Exodus 12. Here we go. We're going to go to verse 46. I think it's verse 46. Yeah. Remember how the Roman soldiers were going to go and break the bones of the thieves on the cross and the Lord so that they would pass away quicker because they had to end because the Sabbath was coming near. The people had to go home. Remember how the Lord's bones were the ones that were not broken? The thieves were, but not the Lord's. Look at this. It must be eaten inside the houses of the Passover meal. Passover, remember Passover. Who's the Passover lamb? Jesus Christ. Do not take any of the meat outside. Do not break any of the bones. This is Exodus chapter 12, verse 46. That is also a very interesting statement from there. So, let's see. So we have Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6. He was going to be beaten and spit on. Isaiah 69, verse 19. He was put to shame. Psalm 22, verse 18. His clothing was divided among the soldiers. Isaiah 53, verse 7. He was silent at the trial. Isaiah 53, verse 5 through 6 and verse 10. Death by crucifixion. Psalm 69, verse 3. Thirst. Psalm 69, 21. Wine vinegar to drink. Psalm 22, verse 17. He was stared at. Psalm 22, verse 16. His hands and feet were pierced. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. His side was pierced. Psalm 22, verse 14, he had a broken heart and blood and water came out of him. Psalm 22, verse 8, he was mocked. Isaiah 53, verse 12, he prayed for others. Psalm 22, verse 1, his cry to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22, verse 31, a victory cry. Exodus 12:46, no broken bones. Isaiah 53:12, he was numbered with lawbreakers. He died among criminals. And back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, we studied this a few weeks ago, the bruised heel between him and the serpent. And then Isaiah 53, verse 9, the place of burial where he was buried. He was buried. He was destroyed with criminals, but he was buried with the rich people, Joseph of Arimathea. That's just some of those things there. Let me see. I think I have some other notes here. Yes. So now we're going to go to the New Testament, and let me shrink this down back to normal. Hold on. There you go. Now, what I want to share with you next is after Jesus passed away and came back 3 days later, people assume, and you know what assume means, it's not good. People assume that once he resurrected, he maybe hung around for a few hours and he went up to heaven. No, not at all. Not at all. He stuck around for 40 days. 40 days. More than 500 people saw him when he was resurrected. But let me share a few of those. Of course, he only appeared to his believers. There's no reason why he would appear to the unbelievers. What's the point? They did not believe in him in the first place. So first, I want to go to Matthew. Matthew 28. We're going to read about all the appearances he made after he was resurrected. We start with Matthew 28, verse 9, and I think verse 10. Yeah, okay. Here we go, Z. Okay. So the woman, this is Matthew chapter 28 from verse 8. I really want to show you 9, but we'll start from verse 8. So the women hurried away from the tomb. They were afraid, but they were filled with joy. They ran to tell the disciples. Here's verse 9. Suddenly, Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. So that was, of course, one of his appearances, right? Now, let's go to, I think, 16. Yeah, right here. Jesus' final orders to the disciples. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee. They went to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some still had their doubts. Then Jesus came to them. He said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So you must go and make disciples of all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Teach them to obey everything I have commanded you, and you can be sure that I'm always with you to the very end." Okay, that's nice, right? Now let's go to the next one, which is Mark. Let's see. Actually, let's go to Luke. Luke has a few of them. Yeah, Luke has a few of them. I mean, if I just read you the Mark ones, it's, I don't want to be too redundant. So we're going to go to Luke, first of all. Luke 24, verse 13. Okay. Luke 24, verse 13. Here we go. On the road to Emmaus, that same day, two of Jesus' followers were going to a village called Emmaus. It was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked about these things, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. Jesus asked them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" They stood still and their faces were sad. One of them was named Cleopas. He said to Jesus, "Are you the only person who visiting Jerusalem and who doesn't know? Don't you know about these things that have happened there in the last few days?" And Jesus says, "What things?" That would have been funny. Jesus was the center of attention. He says, "What things?" Like he didn't know. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet. He was powerful in what he said and did in the sight of God and all the people." The chief priests and our rulers handed Jesus over to be sentenced to deletion. They nailed him to a cross. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to set Israel free. Also, it is the third day since all this happened. Some of our women amazed us too. Early this morning, they went to the tomb, but they didn't find his body, so they came and told us what they had seen. They saw angels who said Jesus was alive. That's a beautiful story right there. So, then we go to verse 34. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 disciples and those with them. They were all gathered together. They were saying, "It's true, the Lord has risen. He has appeared to Simon." Then the two of them told what had happened to them on the way. They told how they had recognized Jesus when he broke the bread. The disciples were still talking this when Jesus himself suddenly stood among them. He said, "May you have peace." They were surprised and terrified. They thought that they were seeing a ghost. Jesus said to them, "Why are you so troubled? Why do you have any doubts in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It's really me. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have a body or bones, but you can see that I do." Beautiful, huh? And of course, in John, which we're going to read in a little bit, we're going to go back to John. John 21. Here we go. John 21. Actually, all the way. We're going to read that. Actually, we're just going to read that right now in the other Bible. So, but also, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It says a lot. Well, a lot of important things, but a few things, but very important things. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, by the way, that's where I'm going to. We're going to read, we're going to keep it simple, 6 and 7. And then I've got to go back to the Gospel of John and finish that up with you guys. So this is 1 Corinthians, verse 6. Oh, sorry. Verse 6 and verse 7. Okay. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at the same time. Most of them are still living, but some have passed away. He appeared to James, then he appeared to all the apostles. Last of all, he also appeared to me. I was like someone who wasn't born at the right time. You know who he's talking about, right? Paul. Jesus appeared to Paul. Because remember on the road to Damascus? So that's beautiful right there. That's why Paul can be considered an apostle. But so it tells you a lot right there how many prophecies in the Bible point to Jesus Christ. And it's amazing. It really, truly is amazing. So let's continue now with a study of the Gospel of John. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. 19? We'll start from 19, right? I think that's where we left off last night. So, yeah, we'll start from right there. Okay, can you guys see that? Let me see. There we go. That Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. Peace be with you, he said. As he spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hands and his side. They were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. Again, he said, Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. Then he breathed on them and said, Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, they are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven. Okay, now 24. Jesus appears to Thomas. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, We've seen the Lord. We've seen the Lord. But he replied, I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side. So, for whatever reason, Thomas the twin missed the meeting when Jesus appeared to the group of his disciples in an upper room. When the other disciples kept telling him they had seen Jesus, he didn't believe them. He wanted to see physical evidence that Jesus really was alive, right? And to put his hands, if you will, in the nail holes in the side wound. Thomas insisted that he had to see the proof before he would believe in Jesus' resurrection. And actually, he wasn't any different than other people who had been in that room. They had seen Jesus in the flesh, which is what Thomas wanted to do. You can't blame him for that, you know. 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you, he said. Then he said to Thomas, Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound at my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. A week later, the disciples were locked behind closed doors again. But this time, guess what? Thomas was right there with them. Jesus appeared like he had done a week before, right? Suddenly standing in their midst without walking through the door like a normal person. His greeting was the same too. Shalom, which is peace to you. Then he showed Thomas the evidence he wanted, the nail holes in his hand and the wound on his side. The Lord invited his disciple to touch him in those spots. Jesus wanted Thomas to believe instead of doubting his resurrection, you know. Okay, my Lord and my God, Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. Thomas didn't need to touch the evidence of Jesus' scars that proved he was the same man who had passed away. Seeing Jesus was enough for him to blurt out, My Lord and my God. Thomas finally believed Jesus, that he was who he said he was, God, the Messiah, who rose from the grave. He first had to see for himself, though. In another month, no one else will be able to see Jesus face to face before believing in him. Faith is not dependent on sight, however. In fact, those who believe without seeing, that means all of us here right now, are blessed or made happy. Now, notice that Jesus did not scold Thomas for doubting that he was alive and for wanting tangible proof of his resurrection. Instead, he met Thomas where he was at spiritually and provided the evidence Thomas thought he needed. Doubts from a searching heart, not a hard heart, are not sinful. We can take those doubts to Jesus in prayer and Bible reading and get answers. Let's finish chapter 20. The disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you will have life by the power of his name. So remember, writing, I don't know if you guys went to school or university, college, but remember writing term papers and essays in high school or college. English teachers taught us to start a paper with a thesis or a statement, right? Although he stated it near the end of the book instead of the beginning, these verses are the key verses for the book. They explain why John wrote the gospel so people who read it will believe that Jesus is God's son and gain eternal life. John didn't record every miracle Jesus did, though. He didn't. Instead, he selected the ones that clearly point to Jesus' deity. He told us all we need to know about Jesus so we can have eternal life. And that's a beautiful statement right there. Let's continue with 21. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. Now, this is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said. So they all went in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. So what's happening here? Jesus had risen from the grave and was appearing to his followers before returning to heaven. One of these appearances was to 7 disciples: Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, brothers James and John, and 2 others. It was by the Sea of Tiberias, by the way. The disciples must have felt lost as to what to do next. You can imagine, right? Jesus had told them he would meet them in Galilee, although he hadn't specified a date. They returned there and waited for him while he was out talking to others. With nothing on the agenda, Peter took the lead and announced that he was going to go fishing. Why not, right? The others followed right behind him. Although night fishing generally was profitable, they actually caught nothing that night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples could not see who he was. He called out, "Fellas, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. After a wasted night of fishing, what happened? Well, the disciples headed for shore. Standing there was a man they did not recognize at first. Perhaps it was their tiredness, who knows, the early morning haze, the lack of light, or the fact that their minds were on fishing and they were not expecting Jesus at this point, right? When they were about 100 yards away, Jesus asked if they had caught any fish. They hadn't. So Jesus told them to throw the net over the starboard side. When they obeyed, the net filled with so many fish they couldn't haul it in. This was not the first time this kind of miracle had happened to some of the disciples. In fact, there was a close rerun from the beginning of Jesus' ministry with the 12 disciples. The thing is, too often, we are like these disciples, trying to do things in our own strength, making decisions without praying about them. It wasn't until Jesus told the disciples where to fish that they caught any. When we reach the end of our own resources, he is standing by to share his. Then the disciples Jesus loved, that's John, said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed for shore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread to top it off. John was the first to recognize Jesus. It may have been the repeat catch of fish that did it, or perhaps it was Jesus' voice, but whatever the reason, he turned to Peter and identified the man on shore as their Lord or Master. When Peter heard that, he was so excited, Can you imagine that he actually put on his robe and dove in to swim to shore? He hadn't been thinking clearly. He would have left the robe behind. Peter stepped out of the water, weighed down with dripping clothes, although Jesus had already appeared privately to Peter, and no doubt Peter had confessed his sin of denial and received forgiveness. Remember when he denied him 3 times? The two of them may not have spent much time together. Maybe this was an awkward moment for Peter. Maybe he was embarrassed by the fact that he had gone fishing instead of waiting. Maybe he was just overjoyed to see his Lord and friend. It's a beautiful thing, though, no matter what. While Peter stood there, the rest of the crew rowed and sailed in, dragging a net stuffed with fish. When they hit the beach, they noticed Jesus had built a campfire and was charbroiling fish for breakfast already. Let's continue. "Bring some of the fish you've caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went on board and dragged the net to shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net had not torn. When Jesus asked for some of the freshly caught fish, Peter was the first one to volunteer to bring the miraculous catch ashore. John was careful to record the exact number of fish and to mention that they were large, truly in overabundance. The catch was so big that it should have torn the net, but it didn't. Only a fisherman would have been so impressed as to note those kind of details. If Peter hauled that catch ashore, he wasn't a wimpy lightweight. That many fish plus a wet net weighed about 300 pounds, actually. Think about that for a second. "Now come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to the disciples as he had been raised from the grave. The 3rd time. Before talking with Peter, Jesus met his physical needs. He gave him breakfast, time to dry off from his swim, a chance to warm up by the fire, and time to relax with a friend. Jesus was still caring for his disciples even now. By this time, the disciples had all figured out the man on the beach was Jesus. As if to confirm his identity, he offered them bread and fish. They would have helped, but they couldn't help but recall the feeding of the 5,000 when Jesus multiplied bread and fish, remember? And used his disciples to pass the food out to the crowd. John noted that this was the 3rd time Jesus appeared to the disciples. The first 2 times was in the upper room. I don't know if you guys remember. Okay. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A 3rd time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Interesting, huh? After breakfast, Jesus revisited the subject of Peter's love for him. You know how Peter had denied Jesus publicly 3 times? Now Jesus restored him to service publicly 3 times. Before Jesus was crucified, Peter had boasted of his love for his Lord. "I will lay down my life for your sake." That was in John chapter 13, verse 37. Although he meant those words at the time, he didn't fully understand what he was saying, nor did he live them under the pressure of Jesus' arrest. Instead, he denied he even knew Jesus, but later repented of his sin. When Jesus had first called Peter to follow him, he had addressed him as Simon, son of Jonah. Coming full circle, Jesus used the same name. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. So it was no coincidence that Jesus asked Peter 3 times if he loved him and commissioned Peter 3 times to take care of God's people. Peter would have quickly made the association, Jesus asked Peter if he loved him more than the other disciples did before Jesus was arrested. Peter had said he did, even if all what do you say? Even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. That's in Matthew 26:33. He had not been shy then about declaring his love for Jesus. He wasn't shy now. In a straightforward manner, with no comparisons with the other disciples, he readily affirmed his love for Jesus. That's beautiful. Now, by the third time, he was actually hurt that Jesus asked him again. But you know what? He got the message. So Jesus assigned him to feed, supply with spiritual food, or God's word, and take care of his sheep. Peter's ministry would be feeding and shepherding God's children like Jesus had. His fishing career was technically over. Many Bible students have emphasized the different Greek words Jesus and Peter used for the word love, one meaning sacrificial love, the other friendship love. Since John used both words as synonyms throughout the book, it's better not to make fine distinctions. Although the word believe is not used in this passage, the concept is though, Jesus commanded those who believe and love him to keep on following him. Suppose you had been in Peter's sandals that morning on the beach. You're sitting around the fire talking with Jesus when he asks you, do you love me? How would you have answered him? It's a question to always ponder, you know. I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself, went wherever you wanted to go, but when you're old, you will stretch out your hand and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know of what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. Peter had just gotten his life straightened out. And when Jesus leaped to the topic of his destruction, he indicated how serious and important it was by beginning with a statement, most assuredly I say to you. Like in a picturesque way, he contrasted the end of Peter's ministry with the beginning of it, and actually went a step further to say how he would actually pass away. Stretch out your hands refers to being fastened to the horizontal beam of a cross. Remember how Peter was hung upside down on the cross in some books, but anyways, I guess you guys, I don't want to go through that because that's actually in a different book. But yeah, tradition tells us that Peter was actually crucified upside down. Jesus ended his commission for Peter with the words in which he was called that 3 years earlier, follow me. The form of the command in the Greek means to keep on following. It's not a one-time step, but a lifetime walk. A lot has happened to Peter between the two commands, some of which John recorded in this book. But you know what? The command didn't change, and Peter still had the rest of his life to enjoy it. Now, let's see. I will read you my notes about Peter's deletion, destruction. My notes tell you a little bit something, because remember, who wrote this? John did, right? You know that John wrote Revelation close to like 90 AD, almost about 60 years. Yeah, about 60 years after this took place. So John actually heard about Peter passing away. So this is what the notes I have. Peter had already passed away when John wrote this book. And according to Jerome, one of the early church fathers, Peter was crucified upside down because, Peter was crucified upside down because Peter thought he was unworthy to pass away the same way as Jesus, upside up. So that's according to Jerome, one of the early church fathers, in one of those apocryphal books, that people, don't consider part of the Bible. And that's basically it. Let's continue. Peter turned around and saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved, John, the one who had leaned over to Jesus during supper and asked, Lord, who will betray you? Peter asked Jesus, what about him, Lord? Peter must have heard someone walking behind him and turned to see that it was John, the author of this book. John identified himself by where he leaned in and he asked at the Passover dinner. You see this in the painting of the Last Supper. John is the one who leans over to Jesus' chest, right? And he asked at the Passover dinner, who the person was going to be who was going to betray him, right? In case you guys don't know. Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? As for you, follow me." So the rumor spread among the community of believers that this disciple would not pass away. But that isn't what Jesus said at all. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" Jesus told Peter to mind his own business. He needed to stay focused on Jesus, not on other people. Jesus' question started a rumor that John would not pass away at all. He would live until Jesus returned to earth. That's what the rumor was. That rumor was one reason John added this chapter to the book. Jesus did not say John would not pass away. It was none of Peter's business if John lived or passed away. He was responsible for following Jesus regardless of what happened to the other disciples. And let's finish up. This disciple is the one who testifies to these events and has recorded them here, and we know that his account of these things is accurate. Jesus also did many other things. If they were all written down, I suppose the whole world could not contain the books that would be written. What does this mean? Well, Greek, Roman, and Jewish legal documents ended with a testimony by witnesses. As John finished this gospel, he added his endorsement that what he wrote was true, since he had been an eyewitness to the events. So some people say we know that his testimony is true, may have been added by someone who was a contemporary of John. Nobody really knows, but it was similar to a seal of approval. Since John was writing for the second generation of believers who didn't know Jesus personally and had not seen any of his miracles, this statement would have been important in judging the accuracy of his words. But what John recorded in this one book was only a fraction of what Jesus did and said in 3 years. He had already written that he selected miracles that supported his purpose for writing, and by the time John wrote this book, there were 3 other gospels in existence already, each containing events the other writers omitted. Now, so we can read all the words Jesus spoke that are recorded in the 4 gospels in about 3 hours. There is no question that Jesus said and did much more, so much that many more books could have been written. John's book has ended, but Jesus' work continues today, actually. If you want to find out what happened in the early years of his resurrection, we can read the book of Acts.